Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. First item on the agenda for today's meeting is the election of chairperson. Can I call for nominations for the position for the coming year, please? Councillor Milnes.
Thank you. I'd like to nominate Councillor Mashini. Thank you.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder for that, please? Thank you. Any further nominations? No? Can we just put that to a show of hands, please? All in favour? Thank you. I therefore declare Councillor Mashini elected chairperson.
Thank you, colleagues. Thank you very much for your support. Thank you, Vilma. Thank you, Brian. Thank you, everybody. Where are we? Number 2. Yeah. Excellent. Sorry, I changed my papers and I'm confused. The next item on our agenda is the appointment of a vice chairperson. Is there anybody who would like to make a nomination, please? Mike.
I'd like to nominate Councillor Milnes.
Thank you, Mike. Is there a seconder for that? Thank you, Andy. Are there any further nominations? Going once, going twice, that means Brian, thank you very much. It has been a pleasure to have you as the Vice Chair. Look forward to this year. Okay, we now start the business of today. Thank you very much, everyone, for coming. Thank you to the members of the public and everybody. The first thing for us to do is to welcome a few new members of this board. I will remind people who might need reminding that the Executive Board has 3 voting members, 5 in total, 3 representatives from the 3 partner authorities, myself from Cambridgeshire County Council, Brian Mills, who is replacing Councillor Smith as the representative from South Cambs. Welcome, Brian. And Councillor Mike Davey, who has replaced Councillor Bagent as the member for Cambridge City Council. And our non-voting members, Andy Williams and Andy Neely from the university and the business community, remain with us. So thank you very much indeed. There has also been a further change of membership. My own sub from Cambridgeshire County Council, substitute member, is now Alex Beckett instead of Neil Goff. So welcome, Alex. I know he would like to be here today, but he can't. There's another thing that I should update people on. We have a standing arrangement with the Mayor of the Combined Authority of Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, who is able to attend our board as a non-voting member. However, today he wanted to join us. However, he is unable to do so, and he has requested to send his deputy. And at the discretion of the board and of myself as chair, we would like to welcome Anna Smith, who's the Deputy Mayor of Cambridgeshire and Peterborough. Hi, Anna, who also is joining us online. We can see her on the screens. Thank you very much indeed. I would like to make a slight announcement. We have got an agenda in front of us today. We have a Making Connection item on the agenda, which has generated some public interest. I would therefore like to take it a little bit forward on the agenda, and instead of as item 10, we will bring it forward after item 7. Hopefully that's okay for everybody. Thank you, everyone. Democratic Services, Nick and Vilma, is there any apologies for today's meeting?
Thank you, Chair. There were apologies from Mayor Dr. Nick Johnson.
As previously advised, thank you very much, Nick. Are any members of the board wishing to declare any interests related to the items on today's agenda? Nobody? Thank you very much. Just a reminder, if you become aware or remember you have an interest in any item on the agenda, you can raise it at any point. So please do so. Next item on the agenda is minutes of the previous meeting. We have had minutes circulated. I would like to ask that we consider those as a correct record of the last meeting that took place. Are there any objections? I see none. Could I therefore move that we take those en bloc? Going once, going twice. Thank you very much. I will sign them when somebody shoves them under my nose, as they usually do. Questions from members of the public, which we usually take at the beginning of each meeting. We have received 9 public questions today. 1 on item 9, which is the greenways, and 8 on item 10, which is making connections. We have published the debates, the details of these questions online, and they have been sent to us for consideration. We usually take those at the start of the relevant agenda item, so we will do that today. Item number 7, we always, at our board meeting, receive updates from the Joint Assembly. We welcome Councillor Tim Bick, who always attends the board in order to provide feedback from the Joint Assembly at their last meeting. There was a meeting of the Joint Assembly, the regular meeting of the Joint Assembly took place on the 8th of June. There was subsequently an extraordinary meeting on the 26th of June, which was Monday, where members of the Assembly and the board met together. We will take feedback from both meetings into consideration as we proceed through the business for today. We have circulated a report on each individual meeting, and they're all online. Councillor Bick is with us. We usually take his report from the Assembly at the beginning of each item as well, and I will assume that we will proceed on that basis today as well. Thank you very much. Which now means we are at the beginning of the actual business for today, and as I've explained previously, I will take item 10 now. In order to explain, we have a few new members on the board. In order to explain how the debate is going to be structured, it will be as follows. We will take public questions on agenda item number 10 to begin with. These will be responded to by Lynn, I think, in the first instance. Lynn will then introduce the item on the agenda for us, which will be followed by Councillor Bick reporting on what the Joint Assembly had to say about this item. We will then, at that point, open the debate of the Executive Board members. So, for public questioners with us today, you will receive an officer response to begin with, but if you hang on and wait until it comes to the board debate, we will also take your points and answer your questions as part of that debate. Is everybody clear? Are there any questions on the process? I see none. So, we now start with the public questions on agenda item number 10. We have received 8 questions. We will start with the first one. William Bannell, are you with us? Come forward and ask your question.
Okay, can you hear me? Good. Ready to start? Okay. Let me just start by thanking you for allowing me to sort of kick off this session. This is a great privilege to sit around this table, and because this is a very important moment in Cambridge's history, of course, and a critical juncture in this journey that you've taken us all on. And obviously you're at the time when you're trying to adapt these proposals to make them more palatable, in spite of all the opposition and reputable businesses and service providers telling you in no uncertain terms that it won't work and will destroy the local economy. The impact that the STZ would have is going to be so damaging, we just can't allow it to happen. So obviously now people are naturally highlighting the need to revisit other funding options for the Making Connections proposals, and you yourselves have made it clear that people want better buses, but don't want the STZ. That's been clear. So that's the dilemma that you're now in. And so, thinking seriously about this last week, I just drafted all the different ideas for alternate funding mechanisms that you could set up. And I wrote 7 in here, but since I wrote this, I thought of 2 more, and I also heard some other suggestions as well the other day. So you could say you've got about 10 different alternative funding mechanisms possible, and they're all viable, and they would work. The idea of this is not to decide which one would be the best one, but to take all of them and you spread the cost out across all the sectors of the economy, making it fairer, less burdensome, and affordable for everybody who contributes. So basically, my question today is, will you allow me to present this short report? It's called An Alternative Funding Model for Transport. I am not asking to submit it as a paper submission that you can just sniff your noses at and brush aside. I would like half an hour to present this to you as a pitch. A short PowerPoint presentation, a few questions back and forth, see if the idea's got legs or not, and we can move forward from there. I just wanted to bring this to you guys and to Cambridge really as a positive contribution, some productive ideas of how we can come up with a solution that works for everybody. It is possible to have the better buses and the making connections proposals without all the pain and the cost of the STZ. It is possible. I've written it down here and I want to present it to you, and I think that you guys owe it to Cambridge, and I also have a right to contribute to what happens to my town. So yeah, that's my question. How am I doing for time? Okay, so just before you turn around and say that it would be inappropriate to listen to this because you haven't consulted or anything like that, you've done like 65 odd consultations in the last 5 years. You can consult on anything you want. I've been in Cambridge nearly 20 years. I know it very well. I know what it can afford. I know what it can cope with. And this is a better version of what you've put forward, and I want you to consider it. Will you do that?
Thank you, Will. Thank you very much indeed. We will take your question. Don't worry, you'll get an answer. But we will now take David.
You're not going to answer it now?
We have quite a few. Yes, Brian. Okay, go ahead.
So we have a very large number of alternate suggestions made from all manner of members of the public. And the normal way of doing such lobbying, which is what you're trying to do now and perfectly reasonably wanting to do now, is to send the members, we get lots of such suggestions, and we have to treat them equitably. So if you would send your suggestions to us, and we'll put those ideas into the mix. Absolutely happy to do that. But it's not something that we would take on our own account to publish any differently to any other set of suggestions or lobbying. Thank you.
Sure, I appreciate that. I just wanted to hopefully kind of steer this into a more positive, productive way forward than it has been so far, you know, and that's all I wanted to do really. Right, so thank you for listening to me.
Thank you, William. No, we will, and I will come back to you as well as part of the debate afterwards. David, on behalf of Living Streets. Thank you, David.
Somewhat flustered, having suffered the current state of the buses trying to get here. So there we are. That gives you an illustration. Thank you for allowing me to ask a question. As politicians, you will be aware of the concerns of young people about climate change. Many feel fearful about the future, and it's a major source of stress that they don't feel that enough is being done about it. So you should perhaps not be surprised that approaching 2/3 of under 24-year-olds who responded to the GCP Making Connections survey, 61% of them supported the introduction of a sustainable travel zone, and over 3/4 supported bus improvements and measures to support walking and cycling. What does this signify in political and environmental terms? First, the level of support for change among young people is very high, even though they were underrepresented in the GCP consultation, and the voices of most under 18-year-olds were not heard at all. Second, young people voted decisively for a greener transport future, limiting the congestion and pollution that car use creates and expanding more sustainable forms of transport. Since they are your future workforce and, of course, council taxpayers, to ignore them would seem unwise. Third, young people want safe, independent modes of travel, walking, and cycling, and taking a bus or a train, not being ferried around in cars or stuck at home. However, freedom to walk has deteriorated sharply over recent decades as car travel has grown and investment in walking has all but disappeared. Finally, have you considered the future physical and mental health, the cost for children and young people of continuing car dependency? Motor traffic has eaten up open space, made playing out in the streets too risky, and severed communities. Whereas 62% of children were allowed to walk to school and cross roads independently in 1971, 20 years later, only 23% could do so. Living Street urges politicians to support young people's independent mobility and endorse the shift to a greener travel future. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Thank you very much. I should probably just say we have got 8 questions. In order to give Lynn the ability to give it a bit of justice to each of them, I propose that we get answers to the first 4, and then I'll take the second 4. So we will do that. In the meantime, thank you, David. And we will take now, who's next on my list? Richard Wood. What have I done with my list? Oh, there he is. Richard Wood from the Cambridge Area Bus Users. Hi, Richard.
Thank you, Chair. I note that there's considerable feedback from the Joint Assembly, and I'd like to address one aspect of that, which is in Agenda Pack 410, 3 days for account holders. I quote, "There was a lot of interest in this and members were of the opinion it should be looked at in more detail." Now, whilst this should indeed be looked at in more detail and could well improve public acceptance of the Making Connections proposals, it risks reducing the funding available for the envisaged radical bus service improvements, thereby undermining the opportunities for modal shift. However, a road charge on every day of the week, with perhaps shorter hours on Sunday, where trading hours are shorter, typically 9 to 4 or 10 to 5, and with would allow for 3 days and or discounts on any 2 days in 7, and would be more equitable in removing discrimination against people who are unable to shift their journey patterns. Now, I'd remind board members that some 895 respondents to the consultation survey believe the sustainable travel zone should operate 7 days per week. You'll find that in the Making Connections report, paragraph 7.4.29 and figure 730. And the Greater Cambridge Partnership Board has a duty to give proper consideration to all responses. Such a pattern, 7 days SDZ, any 2 in 7 free or discounted, would also avoid the potential risk of optional car journeys being shifted to the weekends, with the concomitant prospect of significant increases to road traffic congestion on Saturdays and Sundays. Now, this has important implications for car drivers who are considering sampling bus travel, quite probably initially experimenting with a weekend leisure journey, an optional journey by bus. With no road charge on Saturdays and Sundays, a potential increase in road traffic congestion would be likely to give rise to delays and unreliability in the envisaged improved weekend bus services. A poor passenger experience for those sampling bus travel could trigger complete rejection of this crucial modal shift, not only for leisure journeys, but for essential weekday travel to work journeys too. So I'm asking, will the Executive Board members commit to giving proper consideration to the idea of 3 days and discounted days in the context of a 7-day road charging, including modelling the effects on revenue and on congestion vis-à-vis a 5-day per week model. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you very much. And finally, for the first tranche, do we have Ian Black?
Thank you, Chair. First of all, thank you to all the councillors and members who support the local area. I know your roles aren't easy, but they're nonetheless appreciated for the most part. But there are those parts that aren't appreciated, and this is one of them. My question concerns the data submitted as part of the consultation process. And in that data that's posted on the website, on your website, are over 100 letters from local businesses. Many of those letters register significant, and perhaps even more than significant concern about the adverse effect of the congestion charge on their business. These are quite esteemed businesses: Royal Papworth, Abcam, Cambridge Consultants, John Lewis, M&S, and Deloitte. So my question asks, unless I've missed it, when will those written submissions to you be answered? Will they be answered individually or as a group? And most importantly, will the data that those written submissions have submitted to you be responded to in a way that's comprehensible and valid? Let me just take the last 1 minute, 30 seconds of my question to quote from Deloitte. Deloitte, as we know, is one of our country's largest consultancy businesses. They have considerable experience in running business, and they manage the university's superannuation scheme. And this is what they say about the effect that the current proposal will have on that scheme. The USS has concerns regarding the method through which the GCP intends to achieve this. It is considered that the benefits of the proposal to introduce charges within a sustainable travel zone will be far outweighed by the damaging impact this will have upon the vitality and the viability of commercial and retail assets in and near to Cambridge city centre, such as the retail site and the commercial sites owned by USS. To put this bluntly, your current proposal is going to drive business out of Cambridge, and it wouldn't seem unreasonable to reach the conclusion that that's its purpose, given the significant comments from many of the businesses in Cambridge. What possible reason would you want to damage wealth-creating businesses inside this great city? And why is it that we haven't received from any of you laudable, valid responses to these organisations, who I think have the right to demand one? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Ian. So at this point, Lynn, would it be possible to get the first 4 answers? Thank you.
Yes, of course. Thank you, Chair. I think Councillor Milnes has responded to Mr. Bannell's question, so I won't add anything additional on that, Chair. Mr. Staunton, in his question about young people, is very correct that young people were much more likely to support the proposals put forward than average. They're also particularly affected by deteriorating public transport options in terms of access to opportunities and education, as indeed are older residents, actually, who also have a greater dependence on public transport. And we do know that without financial intervention, we can expect more services to be withdrawn in coming months and years. Essentially, the proposals were designed to address the challenges that he lays out, and the board is just now asked to consider whether and how those proposals could be modified to reflect the concerns about them, but still try to address those challenges. Mr. Wood, in his question about 5 days and 7 free account days, you're absolutely right to point out that responding to issues raised in the consultation will, to a greater or lesser degree, affect the benefits that are able to be delivered. And one of the jobs of work of the next few months, if the board asks us to do that, is to sort of test out how you can do that optimally and deliver as much as possible whilst responding as much as possible. In terms of the 3 days proposal, what's been set out in the papers today is sort of illustrative of the way forward. Any of those would need to be further work and refinement to work out exactly how they did work. And so the sorts of issues that you raised would be part of that. For that, I think that's all I wanted to add on that. And Mr. Black, in terms of the business responses, we are incredibly grateful to the 100-odd organisations that responded to us and the 24,000 individuals that took the time to tell us. That's a huge wealth of information which we've now got to help us improve our proposals, including lots of sort of counter-suggestions of the sorts that have been made here this afternoon. We published a consultation report in May, which has analysed the headline points made by those submissions, and we will carry on, if we continue doing technical work, building in the more detailed learning from those submissions. We have acknowledged written submissions when they're received, but it's not standard practice to write back individually, but the views are, and the response essentially is in the next steps. But to reassure you, the business views in particular are being fed into analysis of potential business impacts for the next stage if we continue.
Thank you, Lynn. Thank you very much. We will now take 4 further public questions. Sarah Hughes from the Cambridgeshire Sustainable Travel Alliance.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm asking my question on behalf of the Cambridgeshire Sustainable Travel Alliance, an alliance with 30 member organisations, both local and national, active in the areas of transport, environment and health. My question is as follows. The GCP has put forward 3 alternative road charge scenarios as potential ways to respond to the consultation survey. Scenario 1 would nearly halve the funds available to spend on bus services and improvements to walking, wheeling and cycling, looking at the 2031 figures. And Scenario 3 would reduce them even further. Scenario 2 maintains funding for sustainable transport, but does this because it is potentially the same as the consultation proposal in its steady state, again looking at the 2031 figure. The Making Connections 22 consultation brochure stated that the project would give people a realistic and reliable alternative to the car, and the improvements to buses, walking, wheeling and cycling set out in the consultation proposal were supported by 70% or more of consultation survey respondents. Many people we've spoken to would like to see even better buses, particularly in rural areas and further investment in active travel. It's hard to see how the Making Connections future transport vision, which a large majority would like to see, could be achieved, however, if funding from the road charge reduces by half or more. Any new scenario must also respond to the concerns raised in the consultation. The GCP has said it will listen. We would like to encourage further discussion of scenarios that could produce levels of funding for public and active transport that are at, near or above those in the consultation proposal, yet also respond to the concerns raised in the consultation survey. An example scenario might be if the Sustainable Travel Zone applied 7 days a week and account holders were allocated a certain number of free days a year, for example 104, for use whenever they saw fit. Could the GCP commit to modelling this and other scenarios that do not reduce funding for sustainable transport, but also respond to consultation feedback?
Thank you, Sarah. Now, yes, Mike.
Sorry, it's just a very brief. I feel in the interest of transparency, I should declare an interest. Although I don't think it's a formal requirement, but I am a member of CamCycle, and I know that CamCycle are part of the Sustainable Transport Alliance, I think. So it would only be right for me to declare that.
Thank you, Mike. I believe this has been noted. Thank you. Miranda from the Parents for the Sustainable Travel Zone. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Your bus improvement proposals list fare subsidies first on the list and state that subsidising your £1, £2 singles would cost 16 to 20 million of your 50 million available. However, I note that the consultation responses show that frequency and reliability of services are bigger concerns than cost. Your report talks of, quotes, ensuring the bus is a more attractive financial option than the car, as if this is only possible when a £5 STZ charge is imposed. But for many journeys that people do right now, it is already the case that existing unsubsidised bus fares are cheaper than equivalent journeys by car. For example, my journey today, which was from Stapleford to Camborne, that's a round trip of 29 miles. Using the recommended figure of 45 pence per mile, if I'd come in the car, that would be £13 in overall car running costs. Whereas the standard Day Rider Plus bus fare covering this zone is only £7. But better than that, Stagecoach in fact offer discounted flexi tickets, which are sold as bundles of 5 or 10, valid for a whole 12 months. So even really quite infrequent bus users can benefit. And these cost just £4.75 each for the 10 Day Rider Plus tickets to use within a year. And if I'd been travelling twice as far, maybe from Haverhill, say, it would still be that same price on the bus, but of course, double the car costs. Even if I had a car which was really efficient, 60 miles per gallon, just the fuel alone from Haverhill to here and back would be around £7. Yet, as I understand it, your proposed expensively subsidised £1, £2 singles fare structure would in fact nearly double that Haverhill to Camborne return fare from the potential £4.75 now, with a Day Rider Plus, to be £8, because it would involve 4 separate bus legs. As I've said, when you do a realistic comparison between overall car running costs and the current bus fares, it turns out that existing bus services are not totally unaffordable, which I was disappointed to hear one of you say on the radio recently. Indeed, within the very strangely shaped Day Rider zone, which doesn't reach Camborne but does go to St Ives, those Flexi 10 tickets are only £3 for all-day travel. If only more people knew about them. And the all-day nature of such tickets, in fact, really helps with trip chaining issues too. I, for instance, did some shopping on my way here, and I'm going to dinner on the way home. So, instead of £1, £2 single fares and expensively subsidising those, please, will the board prioritise in their bus package widely publicising the existing flexi ticket options, expanding the Day Rider zone, preferably, so it's not quite this funny shape, and ideally promoting realistic comparisons between bus fares and overall car running costs. Thank you.
Miranda, thank you very much. I've lost my list again. There we go. Next on my list, please can we welcome Dr. Mike Moore, the Chair of Cambridge University Hospitals NHS Foundation Trust. Thank you, Mike.
Thank you very much, and thank you to the Executive Board for taking me today. Thank you. So we all know the challenges which congestion causes in Cambridge to staff, to patients visiting the hospitals, and indeed in ambulance transport travel times. As NH Hospitals on the biomedical campus, so that's Addenbrooke's, the Rosie, and also Royal Papworth contributing to this question, on the campus, and hospitals which are likely to need to grow over coming years, we support the move to more sustainable transport options, welcome the interventions already being made to improve journeys, such as the Cambridge South Station, new park and ride sites, new busways, new cycleways. But these interventions alone we don't think will be enough. In this context, finding the right travel solutions for patients, staff, visitors to NHS organisations on the campus is critically important. For example, given the nature of our hospitals, which both provide local hospital services but also national hospital services, many patients and their visitors are unfamiliar with coming to Cambridge. Staff are concerned about the impact of a potential road user charge and whether there will be reliable alternatives. And all at a time when it's as well publicised, NH hospitals face very significant challenges in recruitment and retention at the present time. To meet these challenges, we do absolutely implore that something needs to be done to reduce congestion whilst providing assurance that any proposed measures will improve the situation in terms of accessibility for everyone and our fare. So my question, we understand that the Making Connections proposals are likely to change in response to feedback. It's a debate. Could you please explain how the benefits outlined last year can still be delivered if the proposals are significantly reduced? How do you ensure that the commitments to provide a 20-hour-a-day bus service, subsidised fares and more services to more places can still be achieved if the plans change. I ask this so I'm able to reassure staff and patients who have genuine concerns about the impact of a sustainable travel zone, but want to see improved travel to work and for treatment. Thank you.
Mike, thank you very much indeed. And last on my list, but by no means least, Roxanne from CamCycle.
Good afternoon. Thanks for having us again. Hi, I'm Roxanne DeBow. I'm the Executive Director of CamCycle, and I speak today on behalf of our 1,700 members. There was a strong call in the Making Connections consultation for walking, wheeling and cycling improvements. 80% of respondents supported making the city more accessible for disabled people. 75% supported more secure cycle parking. 73% supported more cycling and walking connections, and 72% supported additional funding for maintenance and improvements to footways and cycleways. GCP modelling suggests that if a sustainable travel zone was implemented, it would result in over 50,000 additional daily walking and cycling trips. However, there is no need to wait until then to make improvements to enable more people to choose active travel. While CamCycle believes it is vital to ring-fence 20% of sustainable travel zone revenue for investment in walking and cycling, there is also an urgent need to deliver quick wins. The GCP recognises the importance of preparing the bus network before STZ implementation and should therefore be doing the same for active travel. This should include resurfacing of damaged footways and cycleways, widening of paths to meet national guidance and reduce pedestrian cycle conflict, removal of exclusionary barriers and pinch points, including the redesign of the barrier on King's Parade, improvement of junctions through measures such as the installation of continuous footways and the adjustment of signals to make sure they prioritise people walking and cycling, installation of more secure cycle parking in public spaces and on residential streets, and behaviour change programmes such as free or low-cost cycle training, cargo bike hire and e-bike loan schemes. Will the board commit to selecting sustainable travel zone options that deliver an equal or greater income for active travel than the consultation proposal, that ring-fence 20% for walking and cycling, and that begin in 2023/24 with a package of active travel quick wins? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Roxanne. I believe this brings us to the end of the questions on this item on our agenda. So thank you very much to all our speakers. Lynn will now answer the latest four. Just a reminder that after she's done that and after we've had an introduction to the item itself, we will open the discussion and we will take up more of the points that were raised by the public speakers until now. It's not after you've had your officer response, that's not the end. And therefore I hope that they will all be here to hear the rest of the item. Lynn, would you like to answer these four questions? Thank you.
Yes, Chair. First, in response to Ms. Hughes and the scenarios, the scenarios set forward in the paper are intended to be sort of illustrative only, and there'll be sort of further work to do to reach a recommendation if the board asks us to do so. There is, of course, a balance to be struck in the way that the board choose to respond to the concerns. And just as the range of opinions expressed in the consultation was incredibly wide, so we sort of recognise that people will have a range of views as to what are the right adaptations as well. And I think that's actually illustrated quite well in the range of questions we've had even here today. Look, all adaptations do carry some consequences, but the commitment is to try and work out what is the scheme that can deliver meaningful change to public transport and sustainable transport investment compared with the status quo. So that will be the work of the next stage if the board asks us to proceed to do that. On Ms. Fyfe's question about bus fare subsidies, First, it's worth saying we're working closely with our colleagues at the Combined Authority to support them in their work on bus reform, which in itself has potential to give greater control and freedom on fares and ticketing in the area. More broadly, fare subsidies were part of the package that was put forward in the consultation for good reason. They can be delivered quite quickly. They can support with the cost of living crisis quite quickly. They're part of what sort of delivers a broadly progressive package. You are right to point out that bus fares do compare quite favourably with the total running costs of cars. The challenge with that is the behavioural evidence shows that people don't take the total running cost of cars into account. They take the sort of, sorry, I'm an economist, the marginal cost of their day's trip into account, which is a sort of problem in how you get people to change their behaviours. And so making sure that on a day-to-day basis when you step out of your door, the out-of-pocket costs of bus versus car feel like they incentivise you in the direction of not using your car was an important part of the package. All that said, of course, if revenues decrease by amendments to the STZ, there will be choices for the board about what's the appropriate balance of the spend between fares, between new services, between sustainable travel, in fact, and this point goes to a couple of the questions. There will be some decisions to make, which are tricky. Just to flag that the £2 and £1 flat rate fare wouldn't affect the cost of a day rider ticket. It would be if you were buying a single fare, so it wouldn't replace those flexi tickets. Dr. Moore, in his comment about the hospitals, this is one of those really tricky issues to grapple with. The GCP board have shared your view that access to Cambridge hospitals has to be improved, and that was part of the package put forward. Patients, visitors, and particularly staff need to feel confident that they can make their journeys reliably in a reasonable amount of time. And we know that will become increasingly difficult in the face of increasing congestion and growth. Nevertheless, you know, the consultation responses identified healthcare access as a key concern. People have different views on whether the ability to access by car is more important or the ability to access by bus. And so we're trying to find a sort of fair and workable solution here. As you mentioned, we've thought of a number of ways to think about how we can improve access to the site. We've thought of some modifications to the site. We'd like to work with you in terms of thinking about whether those do work. We do understand the concerns that workers have at the moment on travel arrangements. And sort of would like to reassure them that the consultation version of the proposals there in the bus and cycling network would make a profound difference to the commute of nurses, hospital porters, cleaners and so forth on the site. But as I said before, all adaptations will carry some consequences, but the commitment is to carry on providing better and sustainable access to the site. And then finally, Mr. Bowe, again, you're right, there's clear support from the public for the walking, wheeling and public realm elements of the proposals. That's not confined to these proposals. There's various and large investment elsewhere in active travel, 125 million in the last GCP budget. In terms of the allocation of the revenues from making connections, again, it will be a matter for the Executive Board to determine what's the right balance and prioritisation of that funding in the next stage. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Lynn. Thank you very much for those answers. And I have made notes throughout, and we will address some of those points in the later discussions. But before we do that, we need the report proper to be introduced, which I believe is you again. And we have our favourite thing ever, slides. So, just a few, I'm reassured. So, if you would like to go ahead, Lynn.
Broadcasting. Yes, thank you. Next slide, please. Thank you. I won't dwell on these slides as I sense Councillor Moschini is fairly well appraised of the subject matter. Just to remind people that the challenge here is, you know, significant levels of growth. The GCP delivers the City Deal in support of delivering that growth for Greater Cambridge. We know that population is growing faster than expected. That leads to knock-on issues in terms of traffic congestion, air quality, and also inclusive growth, where many people who don't have access to the car are struggling for alternatives. Next slide, please. The GCP has a broad range of investments planned in infrastructure, in busways, in greenways and various support. This particular proposal is about what happens when you get into the city, a variety of things to support sustainable travel modes within the city of Cambridge. Making connections is under discussion today, which you will remember from the consultation involves 3 elements: substantial bus service improvements, a fund for sustainable travel improvements, and a sustainable travel zone, which includes a road user charge that delivers the first 2 elements. In terms of, next slide please. It's worth flagging, just as a refresher for those that don't remember, there's been quite a long process to get here. The City Deal was signed several years ago, and since then there have been a series of consultations and technical work that has sort of funneled us through various questions about some of the alternatives to deliver both funding and road space that can allow buses, cycles and walking to be better, more sustainable, more pleasant. We've looked at things like workplace parking levies, parking charges, closing roads to traffic in the style of option. Those have been reviewed and sifted out both by technical work and by previous consultations, including a citizens' assembly on the topic in 2019. Next slide, please. The report you have today presents the headline findings of the consultation analysis report. That itself is a weighty document. It presents our first level analysis of what we heard in the consultation from a variety of sources, the 24,000 consultation survey responses, but not just those, also organisational responses referred to earlier, letters and emails, meeting notes with stakeholders. We also carried out some representative opinion polling with a sort of demographically representative sample, and that's all written up collectively. So whilst sometimes the focus is on the headline numbers, the report tries to pull together themes from across all of those sources. Next slide, please. I won't go through the consultation result findings in detail. I've tried to put them on a single slide here for you in terms of the headlines. But broadly speaking, as has been referred to in the questions, there was broad support for the bus proposals and for the sustainable travel and public realm proposals. There was lower support for the STZ proposals that deliver them. Within that, there was higher support for the zone amongst the youngest and the oldest, higher support inside the zone than outside of it. Around half of those that oppose the zone said they could support it if changes were made to it. And about half of those that strongly oppose the zone still do support the bus proposals and want them delivered. Next slide, please. We've drawn attention in the paper to some headline issues arising to the consultation. I won't recite them here, but these come from across the free text responses and the organisational responses. And it's these sort of thematic concerns that underpin the options that we've developed for you in response to the Joint Assembly's request about how you might change the scheme. Next slide, please. We explained to the Joint Assembly you've got 2 broad sets of options for responding to the feedback. You can alter the basic parameters of the zone in terms of its hours or its boundary or its charge rate, for example, or you can alter the rules about who pays and in what circumstances, and there are almost infinite combinations of that you might pick. And for that reason, next slide, please. It's worth reminding yourself that we can't make all of the changes in response to all of the concerns because there would be sort of no ability left to deliver the bus and sustainable travel improvements. So the question will be whether there is a balance you believe can be found that sufficiently respond to concerns but are also able to deliver meaningful improvements. Next slide, please. The purpose of the illustrative scenarios that we've set out in this report is not to be definitive nor exhaustive, but to give you some examples of the types of direction. We think they're fairly sensible, different directions of travel, but they're not the only ones. The orange on the left there, we've just put for reference the proposals that were set out in the consultation. In the right in green, we've got a no STZ version for comparison. And then we put forward 3 modified scheme proposals. The first is to make 3 big changes to the parameters to the scheme. So this is about fundamentally changing the scheme in a way that between these 3 charges, we think touches most of the major concerns. So that's to revert to peak hour only charging rather than full day. It's to drop the charge for smaller vans, transit size vans, down to £5, the same as cars, which is intended to address concerns of small business and self-employed traders. And we've suggested there may be potential to remove the charge for hospital visitors. We said in the consultation that quite a wide range of repeat visitors would be exempt, but we've suggested here that there might be a broader set of exemptions for all hospital visitors. So that's the first one. The second aims to address similar concerns, but via a different means, via changing the rules. And that's by giving quite a generous package of free days to account holders, which would start quite high and taper away over time. And there would be an option to taper it away entirely or to leave some residual small number of free days for account holders. And that gives a much more flexible response to quite a wide range of concerns for various people, to allow for their exceptional circumstances or for those that travel regularly, just to give an effective discount on the overall charge rate. And then the third one is a bit of a hybrid of the two. It's a smaller scheme because it contains elements of both of those: peak hours only, a reduced rate for cars, no charge for hospital visitors, and also some free days. So it just aims to give you an illustrative range of proposals. Next slide, please. That, of course, doesn't cover everything. There are a number of sort of more specific issues that would need to be considered in any scenario, which I won't dwell on here, but which are set out in the paper, which could sort of be picked up with any broad direction of travel. Next slide, please. All of those scenarios that I've just spoken about, with the exception of the no STZ scenario, would reduce traffic and revenue impacts of the scheme compared to the future do-nothing scenario. They would also generate varying amounts of revenue, all substantial amounts of revenue, but some of them smaller than the consultation proposal, and that would have a knock-on impact on what you're able to fund and deliver. Both of those impacts are important for what you'd be able to deliver. The money is important, and as Mr. Bannell pointed out earlier, there may be other sources of finding some money to contribute towards it. But there also needs to be road space to allow buses to run well. And so road speed and congestion is an important outcome too. Next slide, please. We flagged in the paper equalities issues for you to consider. The headline there is that investment in buses in general is a broadly progressive measure. Buses are much more likely to be taken by people on lower incomes, and those without a car are disproportionately those in the lower income groups. It's worth flagging that peak hour only charges are more likely to be difficult to avoid for key workers and shift workers, who might be less likely to be able to avoid a charge. And that bus services are likely to further decline in a no STZ scenario, because we know that the network is struggling financially already and is likely to continue to do so. Next slide, please. We've had several references in the questions to business impacts, and that was one of the thematic issues that came through the consultation. We know that the STZ will not affect all businesses the same. It will depend on sector and size. The peak hours only scenario offer a substantial concession to business impacts, allowing a good chunk of time in the middle of the day when businesses could move around without cost compared to the consultation scenario. Important to flag as well that the ability to attract and retain staff, especially key workers and lower paid staff in hospitality and retail, will be increasingly difficult in a no STZ scenario as bus provision falls away. Next slide, please. The bus network itself, to a great extent, sort of follows from the charging scenario in terms of what you were able to fund. But in terms of the principles that we heard from the consultation, it's really important it's less focused on the city centre. Important that park and rides become multimodal travel hubs, so you might not only park and ride, you might cycle and ride, or you might bus and walk. More focus on orbital routes, reflecting the changing shape of the city, and on the safety and usability of the network, and on filling gaps in the current network. Next slide, please. We've also set out a little bit of detail about how the bus services might ramp up from next year through to the introduction of a charge if one comes in. You might recall from the consultation that the GCP has set aside £50 million to front fund these services, so that the bus services and sustainable travel is in place before any charge comes in, and we've set out a sequencing at high level in which that might come in. And one of the recommendations is that we go off and do some more work on the detail of that. Next slide, please. And so I will stop there and just move on to the fact that you've been asked essentially here to note and comment on these scenarios, to request that we carry on to deliver the technical work needed to give you a preferred option to consider in the autumn, and that we work with CPCA and our colleagues at the County Council to do that, as well as building up these detailed proposals for ramp-up buses. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Lynn. Thank you very much for those slides. I think it's important to note that, yes, members of the board might have seen similar versions before, but it's very important that our public sees them as well. Thank you. That introduces the item on our agenda. It is now time to ask Councillor Bick, who's here with us today, how the debate went with the Assembly on this item when it came to them on the 8th of June, and if we could also cover the joint meeting that we had on the 26th as well. And Councillor Bick has written this up for us, and it's published with this meeting's documents, so thank you, as usual, Councillor Bick, for doing that. Would you like to tell us how the Assembly feels about all this?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so the Assembly has met twice during the month of June. First meeting on its own on the 8th, and the second with the members of the board present on Monday of this week. And that's 6 hours or so of discussion on this item. I wanted to highlight from the first meeting, because I think it's clearly been open to some misunderstanding as a process, that we discussed the process that led up to the consultation that we held last year, as well as discussing the consultation process and the outcome, the output of the consultation process. And the relevant aspect of this that I wanted to highlight is that the lead up to the consultation process and the development of the proposals that were put to consultation were validated by the discussion that the Assembly had. And that process essentially was a filtering down of options that appeared to address our objectives, and it occurred through a series of public consultations and citizens' assembly in the way that Lynn has shown on her slide. And so the validation of that process, which having seen all of the outcomes that we've seen to date, was not something that the members of the Assembly wanted to go back on at this stage. And instead they agreed that the thing that should be done, in their opinion, was to work on the issues raised by the consultation, especially in respect of the sustainable travel zone, to see if it was possible to change the package into something that people could support. And that has set the terms in which we continued our discussion through the rest of our first meeting, and then had our second meeting with members of the board present. I think it's relevant because it addresses the points that people, like the public questionnaire. Use my phone. It's relevant because
Still working.
And that is off, by the way.
I think AI doesn't like you, Tim.
No. I'm sorry about this. It says it's okay.
Right, sit on it.
Whether I'm okay with this is a different matter. Yeah. So the relevance is to the question, what about all the other options? And that's the reason that I have just highlighted the sequence of our discussion and why we arrived up on Monday of this week, focused on ways in which we could change the original proposals rather than consider all of the other options. And in fact, we ended up our first meeting asking for a series of possible options to change the STZ and for these to be tested against the policy objectives which had been set at the outset, the equalities considerations and their capacity to support the proposed bus and sustainable transport benefits. And we asked for that so we could scrutinise it further, and that is what we spent our time on at our meeting on Monday in your presence. So the question, so what about those other options? Really, I think that these are still relevant, of course. They're relevant both as supplementary measures, which addresses maybe some of the edges of some of the public questions today. They could also be relevant if, having looked into the question of changing the sustainable travel zone, as you're going to do, you deem that there is no likely progress going to emerge from doing that, in which case then there may be a decision to look back at those original other options that had been filtered out of the process, because as we have collectively said in different ways, doing nothing about the transport problems of the area and the way they will continue in the light of the way the future will unfold is not really a viable option in anyone's interests. So I think it was important to highlight that bit of context. For the rest, our meeting on Monday afternoon, I actually wasn't going to speak through that because you have been present at it and you do have my written report of that, which I'm very happy to take questions on, but I mean, you were there yourselves and saw it and heard it. So I would like to leave it at that, if I may, Chair.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you very much. Well, I think it was important to explain the context in which that meeting took place and everything, so I think that's plenty. Thank you. Are there any questions for Tim on his report from anybody? I see nobody. So, Tim, thank you very much for your report. We will now move on to a board debate on this item. I don't always have to do this. In fact, I very rarely have to do this because we are such a small body. However, given the size, the sheer size of this item and the various parts that are in front of us, I would like to structure our debate, try and make it structured if we can. And I propose to proceed as follows. We should first discuss the consultation process and results. It is important to point out that this is the first time that the board meets since the publication of the report on the consultation results. It was published on the 26th of May. And it feels like a long time ago, maybe it is, but we still haven't met formally since then. So we should dedicate its time as the Assembly has already done. I would then like to move on to a bit of a discussion of the options and the various ways in which the scheme might be amended to respond to the concerns that were raised during the consultation. And this is something that the Assembly has done in our presence on Monday. And then finally, I think it's important for us to have some time to debate the principles and the improvements that are needed and the reform that is needed, and just the sheer need that there is in this area, in this geography, for better buses, and how the discussion that has happened over the previous two items impacts the future of bus service in this area, which is where I anticipate the contribution of the Deputy Mayor to be important for us, to stress the way in which all of us partners in this geographical area need to work together if we're going to achieve anything at all. With that in mind, before I move on, I would like to wave at and say hello to Frank, who is here with us today. Frank Jordan is the new Director of Place and Sustainability at the County Council. He's been in post how long, Frank?
Nearly 3 months.
3 months, practically a baby. But it's very, very, very good that you're here with us today, Frank. And as I said, euphemistically, the political geography of this area is usually described as rich. We have a lot of people making decisions in this area, and it's very, very important that we work together. So thank you, Frank, for coming. And thank you, Anna, for coming as well. We will talk to you in due course. So, on to the debate. We should first discuss the consultation report that was published on the 26th of May, the results and what they tell us and what they don't tell us, and our reactions to that. So I will open it to the floor, if I may. Is there anybody who would like to make a contribution, please? Brian first.
Thank you. I note, Chair, that there was some comment in social media and other internet-based communication channels. There was some criticism of the consultation exercise. But I wanted to point out, and particularly in response to Councillor Katie Thornborough's comments about the gunning principles and also the independent consultation examination by the Consultation Institute that we had done, because that really gives us very firm assurance that the consultation exercise was valid and well constructed. For anybody that's not familiar, as I wasn't before Councillor Thornborough's intervention in this regard, the gunning principles examine 4 areas: timeliness, sufficient reasons for intelligent and timing for intelligent consideration and responses, adequate time for consideration and response, the whole process, and the product of consultation is conscientiously taken into account by the decision makers. We've heard how many times we've met, and I would point out that although you've mentioned that this is the first time we've met formally since the results of the consultation, clearly all the time since that consultation process was closed, the board and other associated members of councils have given this process a lot of consideration. So I'm just minded to comment on that. Thank you.
Brian, thank you very much. Andy.
Thank you, Chair. So the first thing I want to say is just to put on record thanks to all the people who responded. I mean, I think it's the fact that we had 24,000 responses, 100 odd organisations wrote in quite extensive comments. I think that was it's a really valuable data set, and the team, I think, have done a good job in working through that data and making sense of it. Clearly in those responses there are enormously both mixed and quite strong views, and we've heard in the questions today actually some both of those mixed views and some impassioned pleas on both sides of the discussion actually. And the thing that really struck me was in the presentation, the seesaw slide, where we basically have a situation with 34% of people supporting the sustainable travel zone, a significant number that don't support it, but 70% supporting buses. And so we have a situation where we want improved public transport, but we have a discussion about how we end up paying for it. And that's at the crux of this particular issue. My own feeling is, given the strength of views, it's clear that we have to look at a changed package of measures. But what we have to do in thinking about that change is think very carefully about how we balance that seesaw, because if we constrain it too much, we end up not being able to deliver the improved bus services people are asking for. And if we don't constrain it at all, we won't address any of the concerns. And so I think it's all around how we balance those two particular issues. One thing that I don't think came out as strongly in comments so far is a question of confidence in ability to deliver. And so one of the things that I do think we need to think about, a theme that came up in the consultation, is how we build flexibility into any proposed changes to the scheme, so that as a scheme is delivered and we end up seeing it changing the way that people travel around the place, and we build confidence, then you can roll out additional bits of the scheme. And so I think there's something about timing and flexibility and whatever we come up with. But overall, I think this is a really important conversation for the city, the region, and it's great that so many people have got involved in it.
Andy, thank you very much. Other Andy.
So I'll save my comments on the options, for the options. I think in general, again, I welcome consultation. 24,000 responses is fantastic. And it was from a wide range of people. I guess my concern really was that it tended to polarize opinion. That made things quite difficult to get some, to figure out where to go next, to be honest. I think in addition to those 24,000 responses, I also attended a lot of meetings, and there's some perception that you you only seem to meet with the people you know. I think all of us around this table say, no, you spend all your time trying to talk to people you don't know, because there's no point talking to people you know, because you know what they think. So in addition to those 24,000, there were a lot of meetings. So I spoke to a lot of big businesses, a lot of small businesses. I'd say in general, the bigger businesses were more supportive of the package and the smaller businesses were less supportive of the package. But there were big businesses who were really polarised against and some small businesses who were really polarised for. So I think as we go through that discussion, we need to find now the middle ground. And I've actually seen the middle ground emerging over the last few weeks, both in assembly meetings and in some of my more individual discussions. So I think it's time for Cambridge to come back together and find a solution which works as best as we can for all of us, whilst recognising that the challenge has not gone away. You know, growth is coming, which is generally a good thing. I saw announcements just today of factories being closed, things going to administration. We're lucky in this area that we've got the jobs and the opportunities that we do, but we need to balance that with the impact that the growth will have on congestion and quality of life.
Thank you, Andy. Mike?
I should be brief because I don't want to repeat what others have said. I think for me, the shame, oddly enough, is very similar to what Andy's just said about the polarisation that came as a result of the process, even though I have to say I think it's a fantastic piece of work. So it's a bizarre kind of combination. Maybe that throws up the conflicts that emerge throughout the entire debate that's taken place. So I'm very grateful for the work that's been done and the work follows. And again, like Andy to my left, I'll talk more about the options in due course. The two things I think I'd probably want to highlight that haven't been mentioned are there is a difference between the responses in the city and external to the city, and that therefore invariably has an impact upon what we will say as a Labour group. Back to the thing. The other thing is about young people. I was heavily influenced by the numbers of young people who have a different view to others. So the actual the demographic responses are quite distinguished, I think, and that should also be taken into account as we look towards how we go forward in the future. But thank you, Elise.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you very much. Is there anyone else who would like to make any further comments? You've still got a few minutes to think about it while I say a couple of things of my own. Number one, an enormous amount of thanks is owed to everybody. Those who responded to the consultations, those who took the time, those who spoke to us, those who contacted us in all the various ways that there are to contact us. An enormous amount of thanks is owed to people who worked on this. They worked on the consultation, they worked on the analysis of the data. This was done amazingly quickly for how much information there is in there. It was done amazingly quickly and very thoroughly. We have an enormous amount of information in front of us. And that was the point. That's what consultations are about. You are trying to get views. Lynn was admirably restrained in the presentation that she gave us just now. There was a more extensive presentation that was given first to the Assembly when they first met to discuss this, and then to the Assembly when we were there. One of the things that strikes me, and this goes back to the point about polarization that has been made earlier, is that these things do have a way of going down very polarized channels if you let them. So it was very, very astute and very good of the people who had this idea of comparing what usually happens in a consultation to what usually happens in a polling environment. Because the reality is that on anything that you discuss, the vast majority of people out there don't have such polarized views. Consultation respondents come to you with an opinion. That's the point of it. You go out and you ask people what you think, and they come and they tell us. So, and that's what you want. That's exactly what you want. If you have an opinion, I've asked you for it. But when you go out into the general public and you ask them questions that they aren't expecting, usually your answers are more muted, and the polling showed that in the report, which is in the paper and which was presented to the Assembly. It shows that there are people who have very strong opinions, and there are an almost equal number of people that don't have a very strong opinion, which might mean that they're open to loving or hating whatever comes forward. They reserve the right to wait for more detail. What we have to consider is what we do about it, which I do believe we can talk about at some length later today. The point really is that I was talking to somebody the other day, and they were saying to me, you know, I take the bus every morning to go to where I'm supposed to be going. And I sit on the bus, and it's empty. And I sit on the bus for hours, because it takes a very, very long time to get where I need to go. And he said to me, that's the only way I know to get from A to B. Surely we can make this into a more efficient mode of transport. And I really very much tend to agree, because what we've got at the moment, and it has been reflected by the responses that we have had, people really don't like the way that things are, and they don't like it, and they reserve the right to say, I don't want you to interfere because you'll make it even worse. And, you know, believe it or not, I get it. But we have heard Mike Moore when he spoke to us just earlier. We have heard what he said, and what I believe I've heard from quite a lot of businesses as well when they contacted me. We are appreciative of the changes that have been made. We are appreciative of the fact that, you know, we're building more greenways, more cycleways, we're building the Southwest Travel Hub. We're trying to put the money that we already have to very good use, but this is not enough. And we can't afford for the hospital in our region, which is such an important part of the services that we receive and the employment that we give. We can't afford for that hospital to be starved of the lifeblood it needs. So it is incumbent upon us to consider how we solve that problem. Having said all this, I think once again we really ought at this point, the most important thing to say really is just thank you to everybody who's been involved. I am extremely grateful for the time taken by everybody. Thank you to the officers who have worked tirelessly. And thank you for the people who have expressed their opinions. I have had several people express their opinions to me very, very strongly. And I am very happy for that to happen. I would like to draw the lines somewhere, but you know, you'll be surprised at the amount of feedback I am very happy to receive. As long as you stay vaguely polite, that's fine. Please carry on doing that. Carry on talking to all of us. I believe this summer we will need to continue the conversation at considerable length so that we may decide what to do about all of this. Is there any more comments on the consultation results before we move on? Obviously, we're allowed to go back to this. You know, we're not drawing a line. But having discussed the consultation process and the results, which I absolutely agree, actually, it is very important to say, the consultation process was very good and very fair. And it does nobody any good whatsoever to say that it wasn't. We have, for the first time recently, been presented with some options as to how we might address some of the concerns that have been presented to us in the consultation responses. It's very important for us to say, it's been said by Lynn and it has been said by other members of the board, that those options aren't options among which to choose one. That's not how it works at this stage. We don't just have a menu of 5 and you pick one. Those are the knobs, I suppose, are called, that you might want to turn, that you might want to try and put the volume up or down to see what effect they have on the scheme as was presented. So whatever final solution we come up with, if indeed we do, will hopefully contain elements from all 3 and more. But we do have to consider the kind of variables that we have at our disposal to change and the kind of variables we have at our disposal not to change. So that's very important. So on the options that have been presented to us, we had a very useful debate at the Joint Assembly just on Monday. It feels like a long time ago already, but it really wasn't. But it was a very interesting and very useful debate, and it was great for us, the board, to be there. And this is an opportunity for us to say now what we think after having listened to you on Monday. So for any hot takes from members of the board, does anybody have any interventions? Go on, Mike, you go first.
Are you wanting us to feed back on the options now? Yes. Sorry.
Oh, yeah, oh, actually, if you want to put it up, the slide with the coloured blocks.
You start, we'll find it.
Go ahead, it's coming up any minute.
Shall I
Oh, go on.
in reverse order of what happened last time? I think the first thing to say is that thank you to Tim for 6 hours work and how you've managed to get us to a point whereby the board is able to reflect back on what was said. I'm very grateful, so thank you. First point for me from our position is that the do nothing option has to remain on the table. So whilst I fully accept we will be looking today at how we improve the proposals, nonetheless that has to stay there, and that's just for purely reasons quite simply about we have to see, to get a proposal through you have to have another option. So it's really important that I start with there, otherwise I wouldn't be telling, either representing my group or what I think is right for the council. Having said that, and going back to the question that Lynn raised, we do want to see options worked up. I think invariably I would suggest it's somewhere between scenario 1 and scenario 2, which again is probably reflects back what happened at the Transformation Board. Our key driver will be about equity and equality, and I suspect that won't be different elsewhere. So therefore, in terms of looking at the sort of options, it's where does it fit in terms of which is better for those least well off? Is it the 3 days, or is it actually the reduction in the peak hours? And that will be a key decision maker for us ultimately. And we're particularly concerned over the impact upon key workers. So how we get that balance right is going to be both problematic, but also the route through, I think, in my view. And linked to that, it's the business exemptions that I think we're keen to find out about and how that's then linked back to the peak hours only. So there's some strange combination between those three things that we'll want to see developed within the alternative arrangements. The next thing really for me to raise is about the low income exemptions. I don't think you'll be surprised to hear from a Labour council that that is a vital thing for us to look at. And we don't feel as yet we're very clear about what that entails. And therefore for me to go back to my members of my group, they'll want to know in quite considerable detail who, how and when. And I think it would be remiss of me not to stress that. So low income support will be a very important part of our response. Whilst I recognise, the next thing to come to, whilst I recognise it's not really part of the GCP, it'll be linked into what the CPCA do. Routes are important. And again, I can't stress that when we've had the discussions within our party and within the group. People want to see what the benefits are. And at the moment, it's a bit amorphous. And so therefore, it's about how you get a feel for what the routes and improved routes might be. I think there does remain, and I know this is going to be unpopular, but I've raised it with Rachel before, there does remain interest in workplace levy from within my group. Now, that may be something it's easy to respond to, but it would be, again, wrong for me not to let you know that. Having said all that, I say we're keen to support moving forward on this in terms of finding an alternative to the original proposal. But again, that is subject to the no STZ remaining on the table. But thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Mike. Brian, and then Andy.
Thank you. And I should say, I think, firstly, that we concur about the equitability issue. You know, if this was to end up disadvantaging the least well-off, we would be really negligent in what we were proceeding with. But it was clear from the two recent sessions of the Joint Assembly that the two bookends that we're looking at here of the original proposal and the do-nothing option was, both of those were firmly rejected by the Joint Assembly. So, and they largely had a coalescence of thought about options 1 and 2, I think was the message that I heard from those two sessions. And I did just about manage all 6 hours of it. the data is critical for this, but also sentiment, for example, of the confidence to deliver improved bus services. There's a real credibility issue over that, which has been created in large by the current operators, who have gamed the system, putting up prices, for example, just before the capping policy came in, so that they made more money from it, for example. The reneging of various routes, which have required us to get the mayoral precept in place to cover the missing costs of running those services. In many ways, that's deplorable, and those I've mentioned that before. So we have to have something that's a plausible alternative, because the requirement to have a robust alternative to using the car is a key element of this. So whatever we look at in terms of our options here, it has to carry the public with us, has to have that plausibility. Now, I think the moves, and we may reference the Deputy Mayor while she's with us, over franchising and the ability to take control of those bus services directly ourselves is, for me, a critical element of that credibility and closing the credibility gap. Because as we've seen elsewhere in the country, franchising gives us that control for routes, for fares, for service levels, and so on. So that's a critical part of our response, I believe. I was fascinated to hear Miranda Fife's question. We don't look at the sunk costs or opportunity costs when we're driving our car, the lack of ability to find a parking space, for example, so it takes us 15, 20 minutes of time to go around the car park to find and then pay £22 for the privilege of being there 4 hours or whatever it is I was charged the other day. I mean, these are about the behavioural change that we need to invoke, to create, to make such a scheme successful. So I believe that's part of our consideration. You know, Mike Moore from the University Hospital spoke very well about getting confidence from the staff, and we're very supportive of that in principle. And we have in plan, or in build in the case of Cambridge South, substantially improved public transport options for people to get into CBC campus quickly and cheaply. That, I believe, is part of the answer to the growing problem that we have with congestion. And as somebody who got delayed on his way into this meeting today, getting stuck on the M11 junctions, well, various junctions from the A505 northwards, and then seeing the very usual Madingley Road queues into the city. And we're talking about a significant increase in people wanting to come in and out of the city. And it's not just inbound, outbound causes congestion too. So we have to take that into account. But I believe we can do good work on looking at those changes to the original proposals and come up with something that provides a plausible and successful answer to the growing issue of congestion, which is the principal reason we're here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Brian. Andy.
Thank you, Chair. So I'll start with the green one. I think we agreed that it wasn't to do nothing, it was do something different to what we're doing. I think our language needs to be right, because we are the GCP and we're looking for constructive things to do all the time. I think there is an option, theoretical option, of we don't do the STZ, we either come up with an alternative way of funding, or we make further improvements, micro improvements as we've been doing. I guess, and I say that, and then I've been on the Assembly and Board for 7 or 8 years, and if we haven't done that already, why haven't we done it? If there were easier options, we'd have done them. So I'm mildly cynical, but I accept that there may be alternatives. I think workplace parking levy, I won't recount that discussion now, but it has been through Assembly and Board many times, and there's reasons why it was discounted. Let's not go through the individual reasons. But if there are alternatives to the Sustainable Transport Zone, we should always continue to evolve and consider them. But we're 7 or 8 years in. I mean, there's another 7 or 8 years before we make a decision, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't be open-minded even at this late stage of something. I'm happy to look at the paper of alternative funding models. If there's a really good one in there, I'd question what we've been doing for the last 7 or 8 years. So let's have a look, but let's not discount anything. So it's really a constructive alternative that we should at least be considering. If I then come back a little bit to the consultation results, I think, again, it did polarise decision. It polarised opinion amongst businesses, and it really came down to a belief of whether you thought the congestion was the biggest threat to your business through the inability of employees to get to work or quality of life, or you believe the congestion itself either wasn't as big an issue or would the charge would be more of a disbenefit. So it's whether you think the congestion is more of a disbenefit or whether you think it's the charge more of a disbenefit. And to an extent, that's a judgment call, and people have different perspectives and will have different views on that. I think there was, even within that, general support for an improved bus service. It wasn't 100%, but I'd say business were generally there. There's some who still believe that congestion is some sort of conspiracy theory, that if we just took away a few bollards, everything would be sorted. Now, I would say, as of today, that's possible if you took everything away. But I look into the future, and I know Mike from CUH would say, even with Cambridge South train station, the trips on the campus are going to go up by 50% in the next 5 to 10 years. Cambridge South train station isn't enough, and that is one of only 3 or 4 growth sites around Cambridge. I see the growth. I can tell you a 50% growth, there will be congestion whatever we do. It doesn't take a lot of science to work out we are going to be congested, and therefore, in my view, the disbenefit of congestion overweighs the disbenefit of a charge. The challenge we really have is the bus service going to be good enough, which is the other concern. I think most people support the bus service. Don't think business is convinced it's world class, but GCP is making good moves. There's the Greenways projects, there's the busways, there's all the schemes that are going through. I think that has to be the start rather than the end of a world-class bus service. That may go beyond GCP's life, and we need to look beyond there. But the busways form a good off-road start to that point as well. What I would say is that the funding package that we have in place that will be generated through the STZ, to my mind, is the minimum funding that we require. That doesn't mean that all of the funding we require for buses needs to come from the Sustainable Transport Zone, but I'd be very reluctant to see any reduction in the bus service that we're going to provide, even if that has to come through alternative sources of revenue generation. And I think that's where business would bulk. If we get a reduced charge and a crap bus service, nobody wins. It really needs to be sufficient to justify what the pain we're going to go through.
Thank you, Andy. Is there any, Andy, would you want to later?
Yeah, just a couple of points. So on the language piece that the other end just raised, I agree completely. I mean, I think there's a danger if we use the language and say do nothing, because the world is going to change around us. We are going to see increased numbers of journeys. We're going to see increased growth in this region, and as Andrew was talking about, in many ways that's good. It creates good opportunities for people. There's good jobs and so on. And so the world's not going to stay stable. So I think do nothing is not quite the right language. I think the no STZ question, if we can find an alternative way of funding this, we would love to hear about it. And so I would also welcome seeing the papers that were mentioned earlier. The second point I would emphasise, I think, is around the inequalities and protecting people. So one of the things that I heard the most in some of the conversations I was involved in is real concern about how do we end up with a scheme that protects people on low incomes, that have complex travel needs, etc., etc. And so I think thinking through that is really important. I would also say that on the list of options that are up there at the moment, I've sort of hinted this earlier, for me the one on the far left, the scheme as it was consulted on, is not where we're going to end up. There was clearly enough views and comments about that say that we have to change and modify, but I'm back to the seesaw. It's how we balance that. And so there's got to be some blend between 1 and 2 where we get enough improvements that people say this is worthwhile, without it being too punitive. And that's the conversation we need to have.
Andy, thank you very much. Is there any further comments anybody wants? Yes, Andy.
Just checking, Chair, you'll have to have a double dip on this because it's been a long consultation process. So I only got to the two ends really, didn't I? I just in terms of what we should actually do next, I actually think business should defer to the community and the politicians on equitability because that really is key to this. Having said that then, politicians, I vaguely favour not peak hours only, but a period during the course of the day where you would be able to go about. I think the scheme seems quite draconian, particularly within the city, that you feel stuck, both by the size, a big boundary, quite draconian boundary, and then you can't get about. And some of the feedback I was getting was if we could just get about 1 or 2 or 3 hours a day, then that would be great. I balanced that with 3 days. Again, the language, 3 days, make it seem that driving is a sort of like a bonus and a prize, something you should be aspiring to. And then I'll come back to, put it really down to, the politicians really understand that equitability issue, how we make sure people on low incomes are being supported through this. I would sacrifice both of those if we could better protect those on low incomes and make sure they're not being penalised as a consequence of what we're doing. And then finally, when I was looking through that and speaking to some business colleagues, it did seem a bit mean that we were charging vans of the same footprint of a large car twice as much as a large car. So that's why we slipped in that van's £5, because it just seemed inequitable. If they're taking, it should be the amount of road space you're taking. We've argued we're going to charge electric cars because it's road space. You can't then say we're going to charge a van the same size as a car. My proviso that again is if that means we can't maintain the revenue to run the scheme, then I can reconsider that. It's all this balancing act, isn't it? But I think it's really, I'd like to see equitability. We should be driven by our politicians on equitability.
Thank you, Andy. Brian?
So, as the dialogue has begun, as it were, I was similarly worried by this idea that we should charge, a small delivery van or somebody, a tradesperson going off and doing his work. I mean, I used to do service provision in Cambridge City as a freelance IT consultant and wouldn't go in before 10 o'clock or leave much after 3 or 3:30 at the most because I wanted to avoid the congestion. And the opportunity cost is something that isn't obvious, perhaps. I mean, I had several conversations with people who said, oh, I'm really worried about this, extra burden of a tenner, as it was in the original proposal. And you said, but how long do you need to be stuck in traffic before £10 or £5 if we're doing it, before it's cost you an awful lot more in lost revenue than the charge would cost you. And that's slightly different thinking. We've talked about some costs in running cars and so on. Different thinking about the way we do our shopping, for example. So we're now very familiar with click and collect. So we go online and it arrives. There's also a slightly different model with shop and deliver. So Mr. Mackay, who's with us again today, is very worried about people not being able to get into his shop and take things home. But we've had shop and deliver services at IKEA, for example, for a long time. I mean, I can't get my Billy bookcase I can't get it home on my existing vehicle. I have to get it delivered by somebody. But they had a fleet of delivery drivers waiting to take your stuff home for you. Now, and if you amortize the cost over a day's worth of fees, then it's not really a problem for the economics of that model to work. So I think we need to generate some different thinking about the way that we do things in association with a new scheme around an STZ. So that's my perspective.
Thank you, Brian. Yes, Mike?
Really, just as an apology to you, I think, for sloppy language to both the Andys. It was about no STZ. And oddly enough, I think, if I remember rightly, the second board that Tim chaired Councillor Williams, if I've got it right, I think Andy and I were talking about it before, she identified, I see you there. So it's about if the STZ doesn't go ahead, then we do need to look at other things. So I think that's specifically what I would be saying. So apologies for sloppy language. I'm intrigued by the notion of equity from politicians. I think whilst it's great to have that responsibility, I think we'll probably be listening to a range of views.
I guess what I'm saying is you have a represented people who aren't accessible to businesses. And I think businesses are very aware of that. And you've taught communities that we don't have access to.
Thank you, everyone. Anybody else make any further comments on the various options for amending the scheme? I mean, obviously, we'll carry on talking about this. This is by no means the final chance. But, you know, while you think about whether you want to add anything, I mean, there are a few things that we ought to mention. Number one, do nothing / no STZ / I don't know if I'm the only one here who is being unpleasantly transported back to those febrile years of 2017-18, when you couldn't turn on the TV or leave the front door without hearing things about deal, no deal, take deal or no deal off the table, you know, the famed B word, you know. We don't need to argue semantics about that. If whether or not we keep a no STZ scenario on the table, you know, let's do an absurdum discussion, I don't know. Anyway, let's imagine we take it off the table now. Let's imagine I exercise my power, which I don't have, to say we're taking it off the table now. We're converging onto one scheme, taking it to a vote. In that vote is implicit the option that that vote doesn't pass. So no STZ will be on the table until the very, very end, whatever we do. And I think everybody knows that. In terms of, I am very sorry that Mr. Bannell is not here with us anymore. I mean, he asked us if we would consider his paper. He wanted to present it, which would have been a very nice idea, but I really would be quite nervous about starting to allow members of the public to come and present to us for half an hour. I think there are enough members of the public out there that we'd be in a board meeting for the next 6 months. However, Mr. Bannell is certainly not the first person who submitted papers for the attention of board members. That is something that we are very, very happy to look at. If he sends us the thing that he's prepared, I am extremely happy to look at it, and I will do as I do with most people who write to me. I will give a considered and personal response in the first instance, and then we will see what to do about it at a later date. There has been further mention of workplace parking levies. Of course, they've been something that's been with us for quite a long time. It's been talked about at some length before I even joined the board. The problem with workplace parking levies is that without going into all the detail that has been gone into, and I am very happy to write to people separately about the ins and outs on everything to do with workplace parking levies, they have been consulted on as an alternative to a sustainable travel zone and been found to have less support. I think it's very important to remember that when provided as an either-or, businesses responding to the consultation really, really didn't like them. And some of the cases that we have seen in other places in the country, Nottingham, for example, where they were introduced, and somebody told me the other day that they stopped growth in the area. I mean, I don't know if that's a good thing or not, but the problem is that it doesn't actually achieve. First of all, it doesn't fund the public transport network to the extent that we need it to, but also it doesn't create space on the roads. It doesn't reduce traffic. So if you're going to want to go down that route, you have to consider that. There is also the question of businesses rising up saying, you know, we don't want to pass it on to our employees, but there's nothing you can do to stop us and we're going to have to. And at that point, you've lost control of the narrative because you don't know. And about half of workplace parking levies that are implemented gets passed on to the employees. The other half usually ends up with the parking places being redeveloped by the businesses who then happily say, you know what, no parking space, you can go on the public highway, and that becomes our problem again. So this is not to say that we want to rubbish it, it's just that these things need to be considered. This is not just a solution by dint of not being what we've got on the table now. So I think it's very important to say that. A point was raised about confidence in buses. And this is so, so important, and I would like to come back to it when we discuss the bus services and franchising and bus reform and everything else, with hopefully the assistance of the Deputy Mayor, who I hope is not too bored and is still with us. I've had this so many times, you know what, I mean, maybe I would consider supporting what you're thinking about, if only I could believe that you can deliver what you say you can deliver. Now, I know that's really hard, but there's no way for us to prove that better is possible if we don't do it. So that's why we've always made it very, very clear that whatever goes forward will need to have a very substantial period in which the benefits come first. And quite a lot of the benefits can come first. Enough behavioural change can come first so that people know that the future can be adapted to. Which actually accompanies the twin point that gets made by people. They usually start by saying, but I have no confidence you can deliver buses. There is also the other point, which is, you know, you don't need a world-class bus service, you just need a good enough bus service. And you know what, that's very true. We do need a good enough bus service. The problem is, what does good enough actually mean? And is there a perception out there that if we just went for something that's just good enough, that would be cheap? We are about to find out that it's not, unfortunately. And even if congestion at the moment wasn't a problem, even if we could fix it by removing a couple of bollards, what's going to happen in the next 10 years? When we signed the city deal, we knew the growth we were taking on. There are people who signed that city deal subject to that growth and are now saying that this whole thing is a lie. It's not. So we really need to consider not what we do about congestion right now outside this door in this minute, what we do about congestion in 2030, where all those new thousands of jobs and thousands of homes that we are delivering because they're needed, how are those people going to move about? So that's the problem in front of us. In terms of the options themselves, I am extremely happy for all the points that have been raised, and I think at this point in time, it is very, very important to just say that we need more work to be done. We need to keep talking about this. We need to get more options developed in order to have some idea as to what we might be able to do next. Because if we are going to make the active choice of not doing anything with relation to a producer charge, then we need to have it looking at in the face. What is that going to mean? Because that's a decision just like any other decision. That, I believe, unless anybody has any burning thoughts, concludes discussion on number 2, which was discussion of the options for amending the scheme. Again, we can come back to it. But I would very much like to move on to talking about bus service principles and improvements and what we might like to see in that space. Now, it won't be a surprise to anybody that one of the things that we certainly we as a joint administration on the county council, and I believe everybody, every other partner around the table today, really, really is keen to support the mayor in his ambition for bus franchising. Because none of the things that we have said we want to do with the buses is possible unless buses are reformed. Because at the moment you can go to Stagecoach and you can say, dear Stagecoach, we don't think you're doing a very good job. Please, would you do that instead? They will smile at you and they will say, of course we want to help, of course we want to do all these lovely things. And then they will do whatever they want. They've got shareholders whose pockets they need to line, they've got profits that they need to make, they've got spreadsheets with their yellow routes, amber routes, red routes, and they will do whatever it is that serves their business, because that is what commercial businesses do. If that does not correspond to what the public needs, then we do need to have a bit more of an input as a public sector, which is where helpfully franchising comes in. And at this point, I would be very, very grateful if I could invite Anna to talk to us about the work going on at the Combined Authority. Hello, Anna.
Sorry, I'm just pulling a couple of notes up in front of me here, so just bear with me a second. Thank you, Chair, and I did want to start by just saying thank you very much for allowing me to attend on behalf of MENIC this afternoon. it's probably helpful to clarify that I'm not here as a Cambridge City Councillor. Although I am also a Cambridge City Councillor, I'm very much here as a representative of the Mayor. And Nick has asked me, as you mentioned at the beginning, he has a family commitment. He's asked me to give his apologies for not being here in person. He'd have very much liked to have been here. So clearly the discussions happening today are a matter for the voting members for the constituent councils. I want to make it clear that neither Nick nor the combined authority more broadly would in any way wish to interfere in the decisions that you are making as members of the GCP. But I think it's not a secret that Nick has a long-standing vision for active travel and public transport that is sustainable, that is accessible, that is fair for everyone across our region, not only in the towns, but also in the rural areas. And cooperation is also crucial to Nick's mayoral vision. So we're really grateful for the opportunity to be here this afternoon. I can assure people I'm listening very, very carefully to what's being said by the board, also by the public questioners who have come. I will be reporting all of that back to Nick. But in answer to your specific questions, there are probably two things to bear in mind here. First of all, the issue of the network review has come up a few times. So just to give you a couple of dates for that, we're planning to bring proposals for a network review to a board meeting in the autumn, hopefully in September, and again in November to enable services to be procured and in place by sometime next year. Now, in terms of franchising, so franchising and other aspects of bus reform are a mayoral power, and bus reform has been a stated priority for Mayor Nick right from the start. It's a priority for me too, as lead member for transport and as chair of the Transport Committee. And I should say by bus reform, I mean options such as enhanced partnership and franchising, both of which offer enhanced control of buses. I'm going to have to be slightly careful on predetermination in what I say here, because there's a process that we have to go through, just as you have been going through a process at the moment. But we're currently aiming to take a paper on bus reform to the Combined Authority Board in November. And that will be subject to ongoing work on the outline business case. And what we will need to be doing is consider the options for funding of bus reform. And we'll need to consider that. We'll need to give details ahead of asking the board to make a decision to go to consultation. And whatever decision the GCP and the county council makes will be fed into that options appraisal for bus reform. And then subject to that outline business case and the decisions made by the board in the autumn, we'd then be hoping to go out to consultation on whichever option is chosen, if anything is, early next year. So that's a bit of a summary of the timeline that we're looking at the moment.
Thank you, Anna. Those comments were very helpful, and I would like to come back to the specifics of the timeline when we discuss our recommendation in just a few moments. So buses and all other forms of travel and active travel and cycling and wheeling and everything that is on the table as needing improvement in our growing city and geographical area. Who would like to kick the debate off? Brian?
I think one of the issues that we've got to address in terms of looking after improving the bus services is the public understanding or lack of public understanding of what franchising offers. Although people are familiar with Transport for London, perhaps, and the fact that the London Underground and bus services are all part of that process, it's worth saying, perhaps, that it gives us, as local politicians, an ability to control the fares, the routes, the times of service. So removing the possibility of arbitrary removal of services that we saw at the end of last year. In some cases, not providing the service and leaving people stranded in the city, for example, which was happening. So it offers a radically different model of control over those fares and services, but although we're offering effectively a prime option to get those improved services so that we can establish credibility that we talked about before, then there is a funding question ultimately over franchising, because obviously there's a balance between how much money we're generating from the SDZ, for example, and how much it will cost us to run a franchise service. So I think it's important that we understand the principles of that, and hopefully that's added something to that communication exercise.
Thank you, Brian. Are there any comments, further comments from the board? No one? Going once? Going twice? In which case, no, thank you very much. That was extremely helpful. I do think it is very, very important for us to stress just how closely we want to work with Mayor Nick and the Combined Authority on bus franchising. I would never envisage a system that reforms transport coming from any other than a perspective of where the executive power resides in order to make that reform happen. And that for that reform to mean more power in the hands of the people who pay for these buses. Because quite clearly, and I don't think it's going to surprise anybody when I say this, the commercial model under which we are working right now does not work. It does not work. Routes don't pay for themselves just through being profitable, and it is not fair for people to remain stranded if they happen to live on a route that is not profitable. That is not how an effective area is got around. So it is very important for Anna, of course, to not preempt any of the process that is going to happen, but we have a very clear idea of what the mayor would like to do, and it is very, very important for us to support him. I would like to also, you know, I have loved the little speech that Miranda gave us earlier, and she is completely right that there's an enormous amount of possible bus things going on right now. Some of them are convenient. There are some fortunate people who are actually able to take bus cheaply now. There are two problems, of course. That's first, far too few people. Also, the buses aren't really planned to go around important employment destinations that we have in the region at the moment. So it is absolutely entirely plain that there are large places of employment in and around Greater Cambridge where the buses don't go. And that needs to change. And the other thing that needs to change is that we need to inject quite a lot of efficiency into the system, because at the moment the system is not efficient. And somebody's mentioned it before. Even if I were to snap my fingers right now and every bus in Greater Cambridge is free to board, I still don't think the majority of people would manage to get where they want to in the time that they want to get to. You know, I was sat at home working this morning. I am fortunate enough that I work very near my house, but I worked from home this morning so I could stop working at 1 o'clock and get here for 2. And I don't think I would have been able to do that if I hadn't been picked up in a car. That needs to change. I need to be able to stop working at 1 and get here in an hour. It's not that far. Okay, so that absolutely needs to happen. And I am, again, very, very grateful for the points that have been raised about bus improvements. And whatever we do, STZ or no STZ, it is incumbent upon us to find a way to make better buses happen. I would like, therefore, if I can, to sum up the discussion as I believe it has taken place on Making Connections item number 10, which was in our agenda. I would like, first of all, to thank everyone for the points that they have raised, thank the member of the public that have come here to ask their questions. It has been extremely valuable for us to listen to you, and I believe everyone knows my email address. If you have any comments, further comments, if you would like the board to consider anything else, please do, right? We have heard, oh my God, I've lost him. Oh, okay, fine, so he's still here. We'll pretend he's there. But we have heard very gratefully from him how the discussions at the Joint Assembly have gone, and it is very clear that the Joint Assembly does want us to keep working on this, to make sure that when we make a decision, it is fully informed. We have discussed at some length now, and we will continue to discuss the consultation report that was published. We have heard how many concerns there are out there for people who do not want to be impacted by a charge that they can't afford. And it is absolutely very important that we are honest about what we put out for consultation and whether or not we can bring it forward as it is, which I believe at this point it is very clear that we can't. We do recognize the value of further technical work before we drop the whole thing. We should not make this decision in haste. I don't think anybody would want us to make a decision in haste. So we have heard everybody who wants us to do no STZ still wants money for buses. I have had far too many people tell me, you know what, but you should ignore that. You know, why are you giving so much importance to people? All these people have said they support buses. Of course people want nice things. That's, you know, you shouldn't consider that. Well, I am very sorry, but on that point I really disagree. People have told us they want buses because buses are needed. So it is absolutely incumbent upon us to, STZ or no STZ, explore all avenues of funding so that we may improve those buses at whatever point in time in which we are able to do so. And one of the voices that we always get far too few of in these public meetings, and indeed in people talking to me, some people who have talked to me are under 18, not very many though. And that's a problem because I do know far, far too many people who have not been able to get to the school they wanted or the education that they wanted because they just couldn't get there. We need to change that. We also haven't, we've heard the word a couple of times from the public speakers, but we haven't talked at length about climate change. That is a speech I have in my pocket, and at some point I will get to give it. We have got climate disaster at our borders. We do. It is no longer a matter of worrying about what's happening in East Asia or in the Middle East, as important as that is. Climate disaster is knocking on the doors of Southern Europe, and I know that because that's where my family lives. And whatever we do, we absolutely need to bear that in mind as well. Before I carry on, does the board agree or disagree or have any problem with the summary I have given? Is there anything I have said or I haven't said that I should have said? In the absence of any of that, I would like to take us through our recommendations as we are about to vote on them. I will summarize them very quickly. Number A, we are noting the feedback from the consultation report, and we thank everyone very much again for the time they took. We are going to note and comment, and in fact have noted and commented on the range of scenarios and other options as set out in the paperwork in section 9. We would also, little c, like to request the GCP officers work with Cambridgeshire County Council and with the Combined Authority, but with Cambridgeshire County Council first, to develop the technical assessment needed to present any kind of outline business case for further consideration by the GCP Executive Board later. We also, and this is where I am hoping that Anna might assist us, would like to agree to ask the GCP officers once again to work with the Combined Authority, who is the Transport Authority, who should be able to inform the bus needs of this region and develop a network that's fit for purpose, to input the findings from the Making Connections work into the Combined Authority's own work on bus reform. Recommendation D does not have a timeline, but am I correct in saying that we might be able to add something at the end of the recommendation to fit with your timescale, which is to go to consultation in the autumn? Is that correct?
It would certainly be extremely helpful if we're able to pull the data in. We don't want to shape your timelines because you need the time that you need to make your decisions, but it would be very helpful as we are preparing our outline business case for bus reform to be able to draw on the data that you have been preparing. And we're looking to shape that business case over the early autumn and to hopefully be able to bring that to board in November.
Excellent. So, no, of course, I mean, we will take the time that we need to make whatever decision, of course, but I think it is very important. I mean, we are here to serve you, and therefore we would like to cooperate in the best way possible. So, shall I move, and would people be supportive if I, from the chair, moved an amendment to recommendation D to say a review of the bus network by the autumn? Would that be okay for people? Thank you very much. Can I just put it in? Is that sufficient, or do I need somebody to second it? Excellent. Everyone's agreed. So that now reads, etc., and review of the bus network by the autumn. And E, request that we develop some proposals for further decision later on about what to do with the forward funding we've got set aside to put into buses. So all of that to be developed and worked on for us to decide whether we want to do it or not. With all that in mind, is the board happy if I take recommendations A to E, including D as amended, en bloc? Anyone going once, going twice? Excellent, thank you very much indeed. We've been at this for a couple of hours, which I think is a good time. We have now got item 8 on the agenda to go back to. Before we do that, would anybody like a 5-minute break, or shall we carry on? Okay, I've heard two different things. Shout if you want a break. Okay. Shall we come back at 4:15? On the dot, I will start, I promise you. Excellent. In which case, thank you very much. We go back to item number 8, which is the quarterly progress report. We had no questions on it, so we will just receive a presentation from Niamh and then the Joint Assembly feedback and then debate it. So Niamh, would you like to kick us off?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, so there's one specific recommendation, as you can see on the report, and one more item that I'll draw your attention to before the debate and discussion. 1.2 under B is around procurement for specialist legal services. Really what this is about is the kind of the specialist requirements that we're likely to need across the next few years, essentially, of delivering this program that's kind of ever growing. So there are some quite specialist services we're likely to need, and in conjunction with the County Council procurement team, we would like to run through this exercise to make sure that we've got the right level of kind of quantity, but also specialist quality of support that we're going to need to particularly deliver on some of the major schemes. So that's what B is about. One other thing, Chair, that I'll just draw the board's attention to, that I briefly mentioned at your last meeting, is just around the gateway review that the partnership's being kind of brought through by central government. So that's underway now. There are kind of a range of key milestones, for want of a better phrase, the first of which is a report into government in the autumn of this year, which is a kind of, this is where we are now, state of play report, and the final report into government will go a year later, towards the end of 2024. In order to sort of fulfil the requirements of what's due both in the autumn of this year report and the report next year, there is now a series of quite intense exercises going on with some of the team and our consultants around what the expenditure's been. Are we on time? Are we on target? All of that scrutiny that you would anticipate the government would want to kind of put on the partnership. And in addition to that, there's a great deal of what's kind of named capacity development and partnership working, which I kind of term stakeholder engagement, which means talking to lots of people about some of the specific schemes, about some of the purpose of the partnership, etc. And those kind of exercises will be with some of you as board members, but also with external stakeholders, with members of the business community, education community, etc. They'll go on this year throughout the summer, and they'll be repeated again next year during the same kind of timetable. So just to kind of let you know how much is going on, but also to sort of explain that I guess we haven't got that much time to get it done. We're working at pace as officers to make sure that we meet all the deadlines that we've been set by government colleagues. That's it. Ahead of any questions, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Niamh. Tim, would you like to tell us what the Assembly had to say about this item? On the 8th of June it was debated.
Yes, it's a long time ago it seems, but just to highlight a couple of points. One was, yes, we endorsed the proposition in relation to the legal support procurement. Secondly, on the change in status of the second stage of the Chisholm Trail Cycle Links project, we asked for a more detailed explanation of that, and I would welcome what's been said in that relationship to in the actual report now. That's good to hear that we will have a more comprehensive report about progress on that. Welcome progress on the skills programme. Thought that if there was a way of giving some of that more prominence, it should be found. And then in relation to strategic risks of the GCP programme, the suggestion that we make sure that the issues about complex governance and confidence in the GCP overall, we need to make sure that they're properly reflected, because they're often asserted, and that would be inappropriate to ignore, I think.
Tim, thank you very much for that. Now, are members of the board, does anybody have any comments? Yes, Mike.
Thank you, Chair. It's a question, really. Was, with regards to the legal potential for the procurement, was any consideration given to thinking about linking with shared services between South Cambs and the city? Because some of the things that appear to be on those 4 bullet points would appear to be things that they should be doing. So it's just why, I just wonder, A, if there had been any consideration, was there any, or is it too specialised, I suppose, is the link?
Niamh, would you like to answer that?
Yeah, sure. So, for all intents and purposes, GCP projects are under the kind of umbrella of so for all intents and purposes, the GCP, all of the GCP programme is under the umbrella of county council services. So we are required, as any other part of the county would be, to go through using those procurement type processes. Go ahead.
You can probably guess why I'm asking, Niamh, because 2 of the 3 partners to the GCP have a legal service that is a shared legal service.
Yep, that's right. We are, as constituted, required to use the services of our accountable body. But it doesn't mean to say that we can't draw on what others are doing, or indeed, certainly at officer level, we most regularly talk to colleagues about how they've done things, about the specialist services that they've used in the past. Can we learn from them? So that goes on at perhaps a more informal level, I guess. But as a formality, we're required to go through that process.
Thank you, Mike and Niamh. I mean, if there's a more detailed discussion to have about this, can I suggest that you pick it up after this meeting, and then you let me know if there's anything that comes out of it, and we can prepare something for the information of the whole board, because I get a feeling that if you start talking to each other for a while, that's probably not the moment for it. But I would really very much like to know if there's any points that we need to share for the wider attention of the board. Anybody else have any questions? Yes, Andy.
Are we asking questions about the quarterly progress report as well, or are we just asking questions about the procurement?
Anything you like at this
Anything
point.
like, oh, excellent. I'm not going to be too long. I just wanted to note 4.9 CBR latest economic growth report showing that there has been a strong recovery post-COVID. So 2021 looks like in the knowledge-intensive industries growth of 17%, and even in the non-knowledge intensive industries turnover growth of 10%, which actually just, they're surrogates of recovery, if you like. But it comes back to our previous point of growth in Cambridge, although it was knocked to an extent by the pandemic, has returned to its previous growth pattern, as has the congestion. That was just a point to make. On now I'm getting involved in something which I probably shouldn't, is 4.18, that I wasn't aware that the City Council had done the work on the city portrait, which is demonstrating the economic benefit of the city, and we're now talking about expanding that to include Greater Cambridge to look at its economic impact. I was going to question, is that direct economic impact? Because I think the indirect economic impact is huge as well. So just yesterday we heard about CUH using AI to identify oncology in brain tumours and saving many hours per analysis, if you like, and that's now going to be sent out across the country. So the economic benefit is one thing, but the healthcare outcome benefits probably trump that manyfold. So as we know, Cambridge has reached not just into, it's the inventions that come out of Cambridge which are just as important as the direct economic growth. So perhaps we could take that offline and think about how we do that, because both the university and several companies have tried to identify their non-economic contribution to the UK and actually the world. I think that's really important to capture. And then finally, a bit more mundane and boring, I guess, on 8.1, which is the summary budget. We had a budget this year of 37 million, and we achieved an actual of 28 million. And it's a bit left field, because I haven't discussed this before. It'd be nice to get an understanding, not now, but again, perhaps as an analysis, of what's driven that underspend. Is it due to our rich governance environment? Is it because things just take longer? But as we're coming up to a gateway review, it would be useful, at least for that, to explain how the cost and budgets have been slightly different from each other. But I'd like to suggest we don't answer those questions now. We take those away and think about those for
Thank you. And Niamh, are you happy to take those away? Is there anything you'd like to say now?
Yes, of course.
But it would be, I think, quite good if we had a bit more of a collection of things put together for our consideration, and then it can be circulated. I think that'd be very good. And anybody else? Yes, Mike.
It's to Andy's second point about city portrait. I'm pleased that that's happening. I'm going to be the converse before. The other bit, though, is that it's being published, I think, it goes to our Strategy and Resources Committee on Monday. So if you'd like it forwarded, Andy, so you can see what it's, then we can perhaps go through Wilma and get it circulated to people so they can see what it's about.
Absolutely, thank you, that sounds great. Would anybody else like to make any comments? I see none, so I suggest we proceed to the recommendations, which are to note the progress across the programme, as we always do, and to approve the proposal to undertake procurement to provide legal support to the programme. Is there any objection to this? I see none. Shall I take those en bloc? Anyone opposing? Going once, going twice? Done. Thank you very much. Thank you for the limited but I feel quite important discussion on this item. And I do look forward to more information being circulated in due course. Which brings us swiftly to item number 9, which is the greenways and specifically Bottisham, Swaffham and St Ives. We do have one public question on the item, which Roxanne will ask in just a moment. It will be responded to, then we'll have Peter present to us and then discuss the proposals in front of us. Roxanne, would you like to come forward and ask your question?
Hello again. Of course, it's Greenways, so CamCycle is here. CamCycle believes that overall there are just too many sections of the Greenway designs that are not just poor quality, but inappropriate for people of all ages and abilities and potentially dangerous. The Ditton Lane Junction, the route through Swaffham Bulbeck, High Ditch Road, the Quay Hotel Access Road, the Stowe Road and Anglesey Abbey crossings, and the narrow shared use path on Riverside will not meet the objectives of the Greenways and fail to meet national design standards. On Riverside, the previous improvements to the western section could be used as a template for the eastern section. These provide additional space for people walking, a quiet street for cycling, and rationalised parking. Current GCP proposals fail to recognise the huge opportunity to improve facilities for pedestrians and reduce conflict in this residential area. By not designing suitable networks for people walking, it is also compromising the quality of the cycle routes. The GCP have responded to many of the concerns raised by dismissively stating that this would be outside the scope of this route. The GCP should look at rationalising parking on Riverside, as it has done elsewhere on the Greenway schemes, to meet the project's abilities of better walking, wheeling and cycling routes for all. And this one's a bit hard for me to ask, but regrettably, given the long delay on these much-needed schemes, we ask the board to refuse to endorse the current proposals and instruct officers to start engaging properly with parish councils, local communities and other key stakeholders to co-create high-quality schemes that deliver for everyone and meet the Greenways objectives. Please let me emphasise, CamCycle does not want to delay the installation of cycling infrastructure. So asking this question means we really see significant and dangerous problems.
Thank you, Roxanne. We much appreciate what you came here to tell us. Mike?
I've got another conflict, I'm afraid. I live on Riverside.
Okay. Good, no, that's noted. Thank you very much. Okay, so Peter, would you like... Yes, Brian?
Yeah, I'd just like to say that it's very disappointing to hear this from CamCycle because they've generally been very supportive. And indeed, the consultation process for the Greenways has generally been very well received. So this, I would just point out, is relatively unusual for us. So I just made that comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Yes, absolutely. I'll say a couple of things myself, but first, can we hear Peter on his answer to this?
Thank you, Chair. Look, we really welcome CamCycle's involvement in this process. We welcome, the questions that they ask, the many design workshops that we've sat in together, the non-motorised user groups, meetings, and we just agreed another design meeting with them this morning. So there's a massive stuff going on. We've had this conversation a couple of times at the Assembly, whereby the greenways are balancing different needs and priorities. So we're balancing the needs of cyclists, that CamCycle are quite rightly representing, pedestrians, residential areas, and at the Assembly we had speakers from residential areas who've got different views and different needs. And so that's the process that we're going through. I do have to say it's unhelpful and inaccurate to suggest things are potentially dangerous. I don't think that adds to the debate. And as I've described, infinitum, and I know the chair is almost getting fed up with this at the Joint Assembly, we go through a road safety audit process in terms of design, in terms of early implementation and post-implementation, and we are committed to doing that. And we will take our learnings at every stage. Look, a number of the examples that have been raised in the question were raised by the Assembly, and they're particularly outlined in section 3 of the report, where we agreed at the Assembly we'd go back and we'll have another look. I just want to mention two, though, particular examples. One is in Swatham Bulbeck, whereby we recently had a site visit with County Councillor, with District Councillor, with Parish Council, and they've got slightly different views, and so we're trying to assimilate those views. And then just finally, because I think it gives a real example of some of the challenges, which is parking in Riverside. So as was mentioned actually at the Assembly, we've recently had an on-site discussion with the Residents Association at Riverside, and they quite like parking at Riverside. And so what we've got to do is to try and balance that. So back to my original point, Chair, though we welcome the engagement, we are committed to that engagement, continuing to make sure we deliver the best possible greenway solutions for everyone. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Peter. Now, I believe, and I will come back to some of the things that need to be said on this item, but before we do that, Peter, if you would introduce the item more substantially, and then we'll get Tim's views, which I suspect will incorporate what was said.
Thank you,
at
Chair.
the Assembly in response to this, and then we'll talk about it. Go ahead, Peter.
Apologies. Thank you, Chair. So this is the latest in the set of Greenways reports. It's the usual format, responding to the consultation, where we're proposing changes, where we're not, in various tables set out. All I would say is the difference with this report is we're not proposing some early wins. So you're not signing things off here. You are noting the engagement, you're noting the work to date, and you're also noting the further work that we will continue to do as part of these three greenways that will be brought back to you via the Assembly for a future decision. I'll hold it there, Chair, but happily try and answer any questions you
Thank
have.
you, Peter. Tim, what did the Assembly have to say on the 8th of June about the Bottisham Highway, Greenway?
Okay, thank you, Chair. So they endorsed the outline business plans based on that key understanding that Peter just referred to, that doesn't mean that, that every detail that we've seen is final, and we are optimistic that other details will change to make them better. The tone of the discussion at the Assembly was that members remain supportive of progressing the Greenways proposal as rapidly as possible, and in particular where the various rights of way and land issues have actually already been dealt with. So the reservation that's kind of wrapped up in that is that that there is an unease amongst some members of the Assembly that it is very difficult to scrutinise these at the granular level that with which they're presented to us, and we have asked that officers give some consideration about means of improving that. And I'm not going to sit here and float options here, but there clearly are means of achieving what we need to achieve. But inevitably, in a body of 15 people, it is quite difficult to see a situation where all of them completely understand the implications of the detail that is being presented. I believe that Peter has agreed to give consideration to that. I mean, it's expressed in the way that the report to the board is written, more about infusing us with the knowledge. That is actually only one approach, I think. It's not an invalid one, but that there are other approaches possible as well, and I'm hoping that there can be a discussion before Peter comes back to help us a bit further. The subject of maintenance responsibility again was raised, and this has been raised repeatedly every time we've received a Greenways report, because however good the Greenways are designed and built, they carry with them the need for maintenance for that to stay that way. And there has been accumulated concern that there isn't clarity yet on how that is going to be managed between the GCP handing off new projects and the County Council in maintaining them. And we have asked for a proper report focused on that subject for our next meeting, which I understand that officers have also agreed to provide, but I think it is quite an important foundational issue to this network. We don't want to find that we're throwing up some great schemes that deteriorate too soon because the clarity with which people have got responsibility to keep them that way. Thank you.
Thank you, team, for that feedback. Very, very helpful indeed. Members of the board, any points, any questions? Yes, Mike. That's all right, that's not a problem. Yeah. It's my understanding, and please help me, officers, if I say something wrong, but your interest does not appear to be pecuniary, and therefore there is no need for you not to vote. It's up to you what you do. But I don't think you need to worry. If you'd rather sort of abstain, that's fine. That's entirely fair, not a problem at all. Are there any questions from anybody else on this? Any comments? I see none, which means, there are a couple of things I'd like to say. First of all, of course, is what Peter said. I was going to reiterate. There's still quite a long way to go on schemes like these. And I am extremely wary, extremely wary to let the perfect be the enemy of the good in these things, especially considering that quite a lot of different groups have different ideas of what perfect means. And we do have to, and I don't live anywhere near Riverside, but I'm familiar with quite a lot of those discussions. And it's not always very easy to marry up all the different views. The other thing that I'm very, very conscious of is just how late these schemes are and just how desperate we are for progress. As a result of that, I would like, if I could get 30 seconds from Peter right now, just to explain, should we pass these recommendations today, what's the next 6 months look like in terms of the decisions that come to the Assembly and the board for consultation?
So going through a process of looking at bringing back to you all of the greenways. So we've gone through engagement, as the Assembly and you requested us to do. We've gone through that engagement, we've brought it all back to you now, so you are acknowledging that consultation and engagement. We are then going to move these forward to a set of designs that will be brought back to you as part of the final business case, and the final business case is when you say yes, go. As you will have heard from CAMPcycle early on, they want to engage actively in that process, absolutely right, and many other groups will as well. Just picking up on the chair of the Assembly's point, the Assembly absolutely make the point around scrutiny from the Assembly. Obviously, we're also working with local members as well in terms of how it affects their patch, so we've got to get that balance right. But so the process going forward will be, you effectively say, yeah, progress to the next stage, but we want to see more detail. We work up the more detail, hopefully getting broad agreement with local members, residents association, Campcycle and other vested interest groups, and then we can bring it back to the Assembly and the board in a format that is very visible and understandable and scrutinisable, and then we progress with the schemes. Final one, and I'll stop, Chair. We will continue to take opportunities to deliver sections of this where we've had broad support as soon as we reasonably can, because the nature of this network is we're not going to start at one end of a greenway and then build through to the other end, because some of the key challenges on greenways are around land, and that will happen very differently. So, you know, some areas we're getting a great deal of support from landowners, and we'll be able to do it far quicker. Others where, let's just say, we're getting less support and may take a little bit longer. So that broadly, that's how it will look and feel, Chair, if that's helpful.
Thank you, Peter. That was very helpful. And I am, although they have nothing to do with each other, I am very conscious of the process that we went through when Milton Road was being designed, and just how it wasn't possible to agree on compromises on substantial areas of improvement on the design until you had the design. I am therefore a little bit wary of stopping the process before we have the design, because I genuinely believe that this is going to pile delay on top of something that's already really late. So, with a prayer to Campcycle to keep contributing to those designs, because that's where the difference will be made, I would like to ask the board if we are happy to recommend the recommendations as per set out in front of you. So we are noting the results of the public engagement, agreeing the outline business case to go forward for more work, and that means that in principle we agree to use compulsory purchase powers where needed, and we will finalise construction everywhere that is possible, including, as per little f, the wayfinding concept about which we have talked at length in the past, and it's actually a very, very good way of doing these things. So if the board is happy, shall we take those on block? Any objections? I see none. Shall we record Mike's vote as an abstention, please? Brian and myself, are we happy to be in favour? Excellent, in which case the recommendations are passed. So thank you very much, everybody, for your contributions. The item on the agenda, the next item, very briefly, number 11, the date of future meetings. We have future meetings for later this year. The next one of the board is at the end of September. My notes don't say when, and I've forgotten, but it's on the website. And there's new dates for 2024 as set out in the meeting paper. 28th of September is when we'll see each other next. With that, thank you everybody for the debate today. We are just shy of 3 hours, which I think is very good. Thank you very much. The meeting is closed.